Although you should strive to be the best player that you can be, not even the best of the best are perfect. Everybody has faults that can be fixed in hopes of becoming an even better player. And for that reason specifically, we have created a list of the 7 most common mistakes that tend to hold players back. Hello everyone, my name is Stray and today I'll walk you through a few mistakes that could potentially hold you back from your maximum potential. Although it is impossible to make a list that caters to every player, the mistakes that we will point out in this video are those that are most commonly seen throughout low, medium, and even higher ranks. And with that said, let's get into our very first tip of the video. The very first thing that you should focus on improving in order to make sure that you have a good foundation moving forward is pushing. Specifically, we have noticed that many players struggle with not checking angles even when clearing a site. What most often occurs due to this mistake is that players get peeked by several enemies at the same time and proceed to die without even having a chance to get a clean 1v1. Ultimately, this leads to very sloppy pushes that cause lost rounds simply because one player forgot to check a specific angle. With that being said, the idea of checking angles seems very simple, yet in reality, it can be a bit harder than you expect. There are 2 main steps to checking angles well. First off being learning maps. It can be a little bit harder than you expect. In order to know what angles to check, you'll first need to know exactly where people tend to hold and contrarily where people won't hold. There are several ways that you can learn this, 2 of which include simply playing the game for an extended period of time, or the more practical method, which is watching pros play and figuring out exactly where the best players tend to hold. What this will do is allow you to know exactly what angles to peek when pushing a site. After you've learned this, the second step to mastering the angle checking technique is developing your jiggle peeking skills. For those of you that don't know, jiggle peeking is a method of checking angles in which you peek and unpeek very quickly through the means of counter-strafing. In simpler terms, you press A and D very quickly in order to peek an angle for a short period of time. What this will do is allow you to see where the enemy is located without having to use a crucial ability like a flash or smoke. After you have mastered both of these elements individually, putting them together will allow you to check angles properly. Rather than pushing in blindly, you should be jiggle peeking every angle that you know the enemy could be hiding in. By doing this, you will ensure a 1v1. This will ultimately give you the highest chance of winning duels moving forward. Before continuing on to our second tip, let's go over our customary question of the day. Today's question is surely an interesting one that really got me thinking about the game quite a bit. I want to ask you guys today, would you like to see a ladder mode implemented in the game that will allow the best players to automatically be placed in tournaments? Personally, I feel like this would be a great motivation for players trying to rank up. What do you guys think though? Would this make you grind harder to reach the top, or would it demotivate you if you can't reach the highest ranks? Let us know in the comments below and we'll be sure to read as many as we can. With that said, let's get right into our second tip of the video. Another tactic that we see players often fall apart attempting is flanking. Although flanking can be a very strong way to surprise the enemy and win an important round, where it becomes a fault is if you do it excessively. The main strength of flanking is the fact that enemies usually don't expect it. As soon as you do it a few times, however, the surprise factor will diminish. The enemies might start putting tripwires behind them or simply watch their backs more, making you a very easy target for them to spot and kill. Ultimately, you should only flank when the situation is perfect. Now, you may be asking yourself, what does a perfect situation look like? Well, before flanking, you should look for these things. 1. You are playing a character that is a viable flanker like a duelist rather than a support character like Sage. 2. Your team is holding off the enemy. If the enemy team has taken over a site before you initiate your flank, you won't have very much effectiveness. Make sure that if the enemy is killing your team, rotate as quickly as possible and forget about flanking. And lastly, number 3. You haven't done it too much before. If you flank too often, as we said before, your value deteriorates. Do not flank every single round. Roughly 1 flank every 3 to 4 rounds should be sufficient in order to maximize your capability to get kills. In addition, one other way to make sure that you're always catching the enemies off guard is by altering your position when you flank. Rather than initiating the flank from the same angle, by switching the pathing that you might take might cause the enemy to watch the wrong angle even if they predict your flank. For instance, let's say you're flanking the enemies pushing A on the map Ascent. Perhaps you choose to flank them from mid the first time around. After that, rather than pushing mid again, you could flank them from their spawn. This gives you a solid chance at killing the enemies that may be holding mid. This is a great implementation no matter how often you flank, but if you flank more than 1 or 2 times, this is crucial to reaching your maximum potential. Not only will pushing the same area over and over again limit your ability to get kills, but you also may end up dying. This is by far the worst case scenario and one that you can very easily avoid by switching up your playstyle in a way that is difficult for the enemy to predict. Next up, let's talk a little bit about economy. Although you likely know by now that understanding your personal economy is important, a portion of the game that you might not have dedicated enough time into mastering is playing off of the enemy's economy. Like your economy, the enemy also has to play off of the credits that they have gathered throughout the previous rounds. By taking into consideration how much money they have and what weapons they were able to save from last round, you will be able to assume what they are buying in most case scenarios. This will allow you to figure out whether they are forced to save, they are buying rifles, or they have enough credits to purchase operators. As you become able to predict these three instances, you should also understand how to play around this information. Although we won't have time to go over all of them in depth, let's quickly skim over the major points that you should take away in order to implement this information into your gameplay. If the enemy is not forced to save, you can hold a much wider angle. This is simply because the enemy will likely not have enough firepower to burst you down quickly, yet if they peek out, you will be able to kill them with proper visibility. If the enemy is able to purchase rifles, play normally. Hold medium angles that are not too tight or not too wide. This will allow you enough time to get kills, yet also enough time to run away if need be. And lastly, if the enemy can purchase operators, hold tighter angles. This is simply because you don't want to risk the enemy peeking out with their operator and killing you before you have the time to run away. By holding tighter angles, not only will they have a harder time spotting you, but you will also have a much easier time running away if you miss your first few shots. Moving forward, let's discuss rotating. Although rotating is clearly important, where many players tend to struggle is on timing. More often than not, they rotate much too early, causing them to fall susceptible to fakes very often. When this occurs, the enemy is able to plant spike with minimal effort, which in most cases lead to an easy round win on their parts. In order to fix this issue, there are some general rules here. Don't rotate unless you see spike, 3 or more enemy players pushing, or your teammates begin to die. What this will do is negate the likelihood that you fall victim to fake pushes. Furthermore, by not pushing in before your teammates are overwhelmed or likely to die, you'll also ensure that your site is protected from rotates. For instance, say that your teammate kills 2 players and calls out that he saw one more pushing his site. A very common decision for the enemy to make in this case is to rotate with their 3 remaining players in order to plant the spike and have a slightly higher chance at coming out on top. By remaining on your site, you will significantly reduce the likelihood that the enemy's plays pays off, simply because even if you don't end up killing them, you will be able to hold them off long enough for your team to rotate. Contrarily, because many people don't know when to rotate properly, you should take advantage of fakes in order to win crucial rounds throughout the game. Although you shouldn't perform fakes every round for the same reason that you shouldn't flank every round, predictability, throwing in a fake once every few rounds could throw the enemy off and allow you to take sides very easily. Take into consideration, however, that fakes don't have to be performed alone. In order to make them more realistic and cause the enemy to fall for them much more, you can ask your teammates like Omen, let's say, to throw a smoke across the map or something of that matter. Something as simple as that can give the enemy the illusion that it's a 5-man push rather than a fake. Something that may cause them to call out for help and ultimately having their teammates rotate off the site that you're actually trying to push. Afterwards, if 1 or no players are left on the opposite site, your teammates will be able to plant. If you're able to still be living this long, once your teammate is on site, you should always rotate back to them. This is simply because if you are successful and the enemy is rotated to the site you're faking, pushing forward will result in you having to fight a 1v4 or 1v5, a situation that's very hard to come out of alive. Furthermore, by going back to your team, you will be able to pose a bigger front for the enemy when they try to push site and defuse, something you should always strive for. Moving forward, this mistake is by far the most common among players under diamond rank or so. If you fall under this category, this one's for you. Molding to enemy play is crucial to becoming a good player. This concept can be a little bit hard to understand, so let's go over a quick example in order to make this more clear. Let's say that the enemy is holding A with 1 player on A and 4 players on B. In this case, you may want to go A much more than B simply because it's much easier to take over. This is a very entry-level example, yet it serves its purpose well. In real games, more common forms of molding to enemy play include watching your back after being flanked or playing more passive if the enemy tends to push in without remorse. By doing this, you will undoubtedly notice a difference in your play. Although the enemy might not pick up on their tendencies, you noticing them will allow you to abuse their misplay, ultimately leading the enemy to be confused as to why their plays aren't working while you're winning crucial rounds that could very well lead your team to victory. We know that some of this information is confusing, so if you would like to have some more in-depth analysis on any of our topics we discussed today, we strongly recommend visiting ProGuides.com. From there, our pros can help you with any of your Valorant needs. Whether you choose live sessions in which you can talk one-on-one with a pro about your personal needs, or the VOD review option in which you will receive a full analysis of your gameplay in less than 24 hours after submitting it, your experience will be beneficial and seamless. Also, if you like Call of Duty, make sure to check out our new Call of Duty channel where we will provide you with great tips for the most recent Call of Duty titles. With that said, we hope that the information in this video has helped you realize some of your personal faults throughout your games. If you relate to any of these mistakes, we strongly recommend that you implement these tips we provided into your gameplay in order to become the best player you can possibly be. Don't overwhelm yourself though. Take your time mastering each concept and implement the information gradually into your system. The goal is to ultimately negate these mistakes through instinct rather than having to think up the right strategy in game. That's all we have to say for this video. Wish you guys all good luck and great games. We'll see you on the next one. Goodbye, guys.